I think one of the first questions that people ask me a lot is they ask me how I made what they perceive as a quantum leap from the world of science and technology into the kinds of things that we're talking about today. And I guess the first time I heard the question, I was a little surprised, because for me, it was less of a leap and more of a logical next step. It simply made sense for me to follow this path. I was born and raised in a conservative community in northern Missouri, in the Midwest of this big, beautiful country of ours. And spirituality, science, those things, people didn't really talk about them very much. And I always assumed that everyone believed as I believed. When you're a young person, you just kind of think that. You just assume that people think the way that you think. And it wasn't until I was in the corporations that I found that nothing could be further from the truth. I was taught in my academic training and then in my corporate training that these two great ways of knowing, science and spirituality, are in direct opposition to one another, that they're mutually exclusive, and that we must choose a path of either science or spirituality, but we can't follow both. And it was interesting to me because I found myself working behind the scenes during one of the most frightening times in the history of our world, the last years of the Cold War. And the question that I asked myself at that time is simply this: is there something that we could learn from our past, a way of thinking of ourselves and our relationship to the world? Is there a way to weave together the great knowing of thousands of years of our ancestors' wisdom with the best science of today, to weave those two ways of knowing into a wisdom that's greater than science can be all by itself, or that spiritual traditions can be all by themselves? And if we could do that, could that wisdom help us to avoid the kinds of wars like the Cold War of the 20th century and the tremendous suffering that we saw from the atrocities and the genocides and the hate that comes from the way we think of ourselves and our relationship to the world and our differences? So my search to answer that question is what has led me on the journey from the science and the technical world as it was at that time in the corporations and in the way that I express these things today. But when I was young, it was interesting because I always thought that when we study science, geology, chemistry, biology, physics, I always thought those were just the names that we give to these little compartmentalized elements of the universe, and that ultimately there is an intelligent force, and I don't know what that force is. But it's clear to me that there is some guiding principle in the universe that allows patterns of energy to form and allows the events of our lives to unfold in the way that they do. So I always thought that when we study science, we were studying those and just never talked about it. And it was in the corporations where I learned that that's not the way that science views their work and their lives at all. So all of this has led to the most recent book. Was released in October of 2011, and it is titled Deep Truth. And it is a book that reveals new scientific discoveries, Chris, that overturn 150 years of scientific assumptions. And many of those assumptions are at the foundation of life in the West as we know it today. They're at the foundation of the way we live our lives, the way we think about jobs, the way we think about careers, the way we think about money, the way we think about security, the way we think about working together in hard times. Consciously and subconsciously, many of those things are based in principles that have been established in the last 150 years. New discoveries are now telling us where that thinking is based upon false assumptions. And people jump in their seats when they hear that in a conference or a seminar. They say, yay, new discoveries, they're going to help us understand the deep truths of our relationship to the world. Well, the flip side of these discoveries is that there is a reluctance in the mainstream, in some cases an outright resistance in mainstream media to share these new discoveries. Mainstream documentaries, mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks are very invested in teaching a worldview based upon science that we now know in some cases is obsolete, in other cases is flat out wrong, but we're still teaching it. So this would be important at any time in our lives. It's critical now because the best minds of our time are telling us very clearly that we're living a time of what they see as the greatest crises in 5,000 years of human history. And the crises, many of us, for some of these, the crises are new, like the collapse of the economic system of our planet. Some people say this just came out of the blue. It just happened. But those who have been following the patterns and the cycles, we know that the system must collapse because it's based on unsustainable principles. And there are other systems that are collapsing as well. So while the new discoveries would be important at any time in our lives, they're especially important now because it's the way we think of ourselves and our relationship to the world that determines how we solve the problems. And if we continue to think of ourselves based upon false assumptions of science, we know where those kinds of solutions are going to lead because we're living the consequences of them right now. So this is a long answer to a short question, but I want to lay this out as we go into our conversation today. New discoveries are helping us to understand new truths of our relationship to ourselves, to one another, to the earth, to our past, to our future. And all of that changes the way we've been led to think about our lives, our security, jobs, careers, finances, in the changing world. And as we allow ourselves to embrace these new discoveries, the deepest truths of our existence, my experience is that when the facts are clear, the choices become obvious. So I'm hoping in this program today we can lay out some very clear facts and then let people choose for themselves how those facts apply to them in their lives.